What's going on, everybody? Welcome to part 3 of the urban log and trailer build. So, where I left off in part 2 was I had the gantry tacked into place, and pretty much on this sequence of the build, I needed to cut that diamond plate into the gussets and get that welded in to reinforce the gantry itself. So pretty much what I did was I just scribed out a cardboard template, and then I went ahead and started torch cutting that with our acetylene torch there. But that one was actually pretty old. It's pretty much an antique, so at some point during this project I had to run out and grab a new torch from Harbor Freight, and that ended up making the cutting go a lot faster. So we ended up cutting about 8 of these out. We were doing the front and back side of the gantry, so that was 8 gussets in total, and you can even see, even sped up, this was taking quite an amount of time, and really slow work. Kind of wish at this point we had the plasma cutter all set up, but that's okay. Still got the job done. We did try using our still gas-powered demo saw, but it's just loud, it throws off a lot of fumes, and the sparks are just flying everywhere, and it wasn't even really faster than the torch, just because it was a pretty thick amount of steel. Once all the gussets were cut out, I went ahead and started prepping the other components for the gantry. Good morning, everybody. So, I love Sunday mornings when they're nice and beautiful out like this. It's a little colder today, but that's all good. Goals today, gonna try to get this welded, at least tacked into place. Yesterday, I ended up getting all those gussets cut out of the diamond plating. I also staged out the rest of the, we call them accessories, for the gantry. So I got the pins here, and then I have to weld up these modified shackles, and then get that onto the assembly here, something like that. So that next morning, I continued with all the other components for the gantry. I wanted to start off with the pins, so I was pretty much just prepping those. I like using a grinder with a 40 grit flap disc. That tends to get all the mill scale, paint, rust, and you can also shape the metal with those to some degree. So I really prefer those with the grinder. I had to do a bit of hand filing too, which is always good, just to make some of the rounded features because I was using round pipe there. So went ahead with the MIG welder, tacked it into place, and once I kind of liked the form, I went ahead and kind of finished off the beads. Now with all the handles fabricated, I went ahead and started working on the actual gantry anchor, and I modified 2 shackles and then started tacking those into place and playing with the form. Now this is really critical because this has a structural element, and this is basically going to withstand a lot of shearing force, so it's pretty important that this thing is welded up correctly. Now I had clamped it into the actual gantry itself, and same thing, just went about tacking it into place, looking at the form, making sure it's square, and once I liked what I saw, I went ahead and ran full beads, and really taking my time here to make sure that those welds are done correctly and that they're going to be strong, because if this component were to fail, you could either cause injury or severe damage, so nothing to joke around with. You want to make sure that this part was done right. Once I got through that gantry anchor, I went ahead and started tacking in those gussets. I didn't run full beads across the gussets. I ran like 1.5 to 2 inch beads in several points that I thought were critical. I figured we can always go back and weld more, and this was taking quite an amount of time just to get everything prepped and going, so I don't want to invest too much time into it. I wanted to get this thing out there and tested. One little thing I'd like to point out is that little knee pad roller that I'm using. I had picked that up recently at Harbor Freight. That thing really saved my knees and back on a project like this where you can't work on this on a table. It has to be laid on the ground because of the scale. And I usually would grab a piece of foam or lay on something soft, but that thing, just being able to roll around on the cart, really helped out. I think it costs like $15, so worth every penny if you could pick one up yourself. Another small tip that I'd give is if you have a small fan, something like that, is really try to blow that exhaust away, making sure that you're not blowing the actual tip of the MIG welder because there's the gas shield that comes out of that. So I usually like to place a fan just slightly above so the fumes aren't directly in my face. And this is just if you don't have access to some type of welding vacuum that can actually suck the vapors out. It's kind of the poor man's way around that. Alright, so we're halfway there. I got one side done. I'm pretty happy with this. I like how this is coming out. This doesn't need to be pretty, it just needs to be strong, so don't judge too hard on the shoddy welds. But I actually like kind of this shackle system I came up with, or call it an anchor, because we needed 2 anchors, one for the winch, one for where it's going to the log, and I think that was a pretty decent solution. I'm really confident in the strength of it too, so happy with that. So I really like where we landed with the form of the gantry and where all the gussets welded up. I'm really confident in that anchor. Next was to bring it outside, and we stood it up, made sure the pins fit into place, and last bit on the list was to weld in some chain to act as a catch for the gantry so that it doesn't just free fall onto the bed when you're winching up a log. So basically I just took some steel chain and a hook, and I welded the steel chain to the gantry itself, and then I welded the hook onto the trailer, and that way it has a little bit of adjustability, so you could have it either come more onto the bed or just end at vertical. So I really like that feature. It was something really simple to do. After that, it was just time for paint. I went with a glossy black Rust-Oleum enamel. I really like the result in that paint. It's the one that I used on the trailer itself, so it matches really well. I just use an electric sprayer because hand painting this would take forever, and I prefer to spray it anyways. Now this was actually the trailer with the gantry's second time out. We didn't document the first trip, but it went smooth. It was a smaller log compared to this, but we ended up having a lot of difficulty with this. One being that the guy we picked it up from had said that it was right on the side of the driveway, and when we got there, this thing was basically dropped in the middle of a thorn and brush field, so that just makes it so much harder to work with. So right here, we were just trying to pull it out of that field, but there was just so much in the way, the gantry just didn't have the pull. So we ended up having to take the truck off the trailer and then back the truck up and skid the log more into line with the trailer itself, and also we spent some time clearing the debris in front of it just to reduce the resistance on that winch itself. But once we kind of got it in line, we ended up hooking it on, and we're using a chain hoist here, and that was something that we kind of came up with last minute. We kind of assumed maybe in the beginning we'd use a fixed chain to anchor into the log somewhat on a choke, and then we'd pull with that, but we realized the log might get stuck up in the air, so by using a chain hoist, we're able to lift it up in the air, and once the gantry pulls it, we can lower it with the hoist itself, which is just really nice. Now one thing, I don't know if you noticed, but that gantry was flexing a lot, and this red oak log was just particularly heavy, so we ended up realizing we're going to have to beef this structure up quite a bit, but, you know, this was a really good test for it. Later that day, too, we ended up picking up a smaller bit of that log. We figured we were there, so why not? But the battery was running low, and that is a little concern of mine, is what do we do? Do we come up with a trickle charge system for the battery, or do we just have to bring an extra battery for the winch itself? Alright, made it back. It's dark out, and that took way longer than we thought, but, you know, what else is new? So, don't know if you can tell from the video, but this thing was bending quite a bit in both dimensions, both this way and this way. So, first trip we actually made with this thing that we didn't document, we didn't have that much trouble. It actually worked really well, pulled the log on. But this one, that oak log, is a red oak. It's probably like 33 to 36 inch diameter. I think we cut it 11 feet. It was just so wet, so dense and heavy, and I couldn't even pick it up with our excavator off this trailer. That thing was real heavy. So it was having a tough time, but we got a lot of good information about what alterations to make to kind of beef this thing up, and such good feedback. And that's so much of this when, you know, we're fabricating kind of custom stuff. You gotta get the feedback from somewhere, and just being on site, testing this thing in reality, you can't beat it. That's the real test there. So really quick, future modifications, I'm going to basically add bracing by adding C-channel to the whole outside of the structure, so that'll keep it from deflecting too much. And then our winch here, we're going to take a snatch block, which is a pulley, so we can anchor off that end there, and then we'll loop the actual cable to that end, and it'll feed back to itself where it spools. And that'll give us, I think, a little mechanical advantage, or at least make pulling it a little bit easier, because that's a 12,000 pound winch, but it was still struggling with this, not even accounting for the deflection of the steel. Just as it was pulling, you could just hear the motor kind of grinding away, so that can't be good for it. We'd like that thing to last a little while. So yeah, so those are some quick modifications we can do. Other than that, there's small logistical kind of things from the process end that we'll adjust behind the scenes, but I mean, I do have to say, like, for just a first shot, kind of, I'm pretty happy with it. And it did work. I mean, it's not like it failed. It got that log on board, but we're playing the long term, so we like this thing to last.